With the release of the much anticipated Tekken 8, we've not only been ushered into the next generation of fighting game, but also a pivotal turn in the Tekken story, which has played out over 3 decades now, witnessing the rise and fall of Heihachi Mishima, the villainous descent of his son Kazuya Mishima, and the moral struggle of his son, Jin Kazama, as he toils between the sins of the father and the light of the mother. In this episode, we're focusing on a brief summary and review of the Tekken 8 story, the good, the bad, and how much expectation matched with the reality now all said and done. So, first off, I'm going to temper my thoughts by appreciating that this is a fighting game, and while it's a fighting game with a long-running story about moral struggles and inner demons, it does nonetheless, by its nature, need to resolve itself with characters finding reasons to beat the hell out of one another. So that's all fine, and at the end of the day, you will sometimes need hammy reasons for those scenarios to occur. But that being said, the main thrust of the Mishima story, of Jin Kazama's story, and much of what has been built up for this game, was slightly more dramatic and consequential for how the story would resolve itself to date. And in some respects, it really delivered. In other respects, it didn't so much. And it depends on what way you were looking at the story. And in other respects, still, it left more questions than answers, and essentially acted as a teaser trailer for Tekken 9, which we probably won't see for another decade, unless they introduce story DLC for Tekken 8, which hasn't been done before. So, looking to the story proper and the positive aspects, is it plays out pretty much as we might have expected from the trailers by creating this super team Avengers vibe for the whole secondary plot line, which is led by Lars, Lee and Victor. And I think there was some really nice innovations here, such as being able to choose your fighter during the Tekken tournament. They hemmed in a little bit of the Tekken Force mode experience midway through the game, but really I actually just think it made the absence of a full Tekken Force mode feel like a missed trick. And once more, we had some cool secondary fight scenes come out of this scenario, such as Alyssa fighting Jack 8, Paul fighting Law, Victor fighting Dragunov, and so on. And I felt this is quite organically achieved in the story from these fighters having known one another from the tournament heat stages, and then being recruited to one side or the other of the fight against Kazuya. It also, interestingly, didn't shy away from potentially killing off a couple of the roster characters, and it looks like both Zafina and Claudio bit the bullet in a showdown with Kazuya. So there was some unexpected and potentially consequential permadeaths in the game story that we don't usually see from Tekken. Looking to the main story, it very much focuses on Jin Kazama and his personal struggle between himself and Kazuya, but much more so than that, actually the personal struggle within himself and his inner demons, the perpetual conflict that he's had since Tekken 3, and looking at the story from a purely Jin perspective, I think this core thread of him redeeming himself delivered pretty well. There was a lot to his redemption arc, with the internalizing of the devil self, the inner peace that was found with his visions of Jun Kazama and his sort of light devil self, and more broadly, the support network of Lars and his comrades in the Tekken roster, which is a very common power of friendship trope that is often found in Japanese media, particularly anime, and this all built up to this unexpectedly epic transformation into Angel Jin towards the end of the game. And there were some really cool nods back to earlier games where we had the Angel being referenced with Jin's transformation. We had Kazuya becoming True Devil Kazuya in a certain little nod to True Ogre from Tekken 3. And other little bits like that, with Azazel showing up briefly. But ultimately, again, looking purely at Jin's arc, it resolved really well, and actually with probably one of the best final boss fights that we've ever seen in Tekken, I think. And I mentioned recently how Devil Kazuya in Tekken 2 was my favourite Tekken boss, and actually I think this showdown with Kazuya tops it at the end of Tekken 8, particularly with these callbacks to earlier games, such as the soundtrack switching to Jin's Tekken 3 theme, and on top of that his fighting style in each stage of the bout, retrograding back down to his earlier Mishima style, and also his Kazama style that is found in earlier games. So that was absolutely fantastic stuff, and I think for Jin Kazama fans everywhere, this was hopefully a pretty fulfilling experience overall, to see him come full circle and have his storyline resolved. Now, coming on to what I perceive as the negatives in the story, and a lot of this has to do with the build-up and what was teased prior to release. I mean, pretty much the reason I pre-ordered Tekken 8 was all of the trailers and teasers were sort of hinting at, firstly, the reappearance of Jun Kazama, and she did kind of reappear, but also all of these dialogue snippets that were in her trailer scenes telling Jin to save Kazuya and stuff like that. So in part, I think the entire Tekken 8 spectacle was built around whether or not Kazuya was redeemed and whether or not Jun was alive, and if so, what influence she would have. Now, on the one hand, yes, we do sort of have answers to these. During the epic showdown at the end of the game, Jin has rid himself and his father Kazuya of the devil gene. We also have Kazuya almost verbatim copy his showdown with Heihachi, saying his one-liner about fights being about who's left standing, before clearly hesitating before he tries to finish off Jin. And very finally we see Jun Kazama standing over the defeated body of Kazuya. So yes, Kazuya is no longer a devil, he's been reunited with Jun in some capacity, but basically we have zero clarity about the circumstances here, and I don't think we needed a lot, just something to show fans that were expecting redemption, to show that whether or not that's happened. Like, if he regained consciousness, looked up at Jun and gave the smallest whiff of a smile before the scene cuts to black, I think that would be enough, because we would have that fulfilling sense that, oh, Kazuya's been saved. You know, they didn't need to labour on the point. But actually, what we learn from the bad ending is that Kazuya, in a way, hasn't been redeemed. He's still a complete douchebag, because in the bad ending, he continues this cycle of throwing Jin from a cliff top. So redemption with Kazuya and the role of Jun in relation to that is still a very woolly, open-ended question by the end of Tekken 8, which is quite annoying because, as I say, all of the trailers sort of teased a certain conclusion and clarity to that. Now, coming on to the final sort of negative, maybe, but not so much, maybe I'm being pedantic, but we have the new character of Reina. Now, Reina's role in the story is generally pretty good. I thought she was a great character, great moveset. She doesn't have a bad scene in the entire story, I think. Everything about her, all of her dialogue scenes were really cool, and she was a very mysterious, compelling character throughout. And as many suspected, and as I was noting in the comments to someone the other day, I did have a feeling that she was going to be kind of the next generation, or at least a significant factor in the future of the series, or at least the next game. I did also have a feeling quite early on that Reina was going to have the devil gene, based on some of the quirky remarks she was making. But the reason I thought that is that I felt she was being set up as the daughter of Kazuya. And another reason for that is also because she wears purple, much like Kazuya does. And for me, in my own headcanon, this made a lot of sense for setting up Tekken 9, because if you've redeemed Jin, who is now a part of the light, and you have redeemed Kazuya, who no longer needs to be centre stage as a villain, you have a perfect next generation sibling rivalry being set up between Jin and Reina, light and dark, which would be pretty cool in my opinion. But instead, they've left this really rather odd curveball in perpetuating Heihachi's illegitimate children sort of legacy. And at the very worst, it felt like her entire story was included to be a trailer for Tekken 9, which we're not going to see for years. And at its best, it's at least maintaining an interest in her and giving us an indication that she's going to be a major player in the games to come. So overall, a whistle-stop tour of the Tekken 8 story. I think it was a really solid conclusion for Jin Kazama specifically, and his duality with the devil. It was a bit hammy with the dialogue, it was a bit unfinished or unfulfilled in regards to Kazuya and Jun, but again, it depends entirely what you wanted and were expecting from this story, what characters you wanted it to focus on. And indeed, if you just wanted cutting-edge cinematics and epic fight scenes, then it's not going to disappoint you. But rather than anything truly conclusive around the senior Kazuya Mishima and Jun Kazama, it looks like we're waiting for Tekken 9 to see what comes next.